A public school advocate calls charter and private schools a form of terrorism. You know, I guess it would be terrifying to see less well-funded, not public schools do such a better job educating school kids. I can see why that would terrify teachers' unions. I'm Dr. Duke, he's Dave, and this is The Dr. Duke Show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Dr. Duke Show, the only program that keeps you educated on the craziness impacting K-12 classrooms and college campuses around the world. Katie is off, so our good friend Dave Fiorazo is joining us all week. Today, we start with the topic of charter and private schools. After a retired teacher claims only public schools should be allowed to teach kids how to be real Americans, right? The public schools teachers, the teachers unions, the same unions that don't show up, the same unions that only care about money, the same unions that had their teachers march out a year and a half ago under the Red for Ed communist abandonment of our schools to get raises. Those are the teachers who only believe in critical race theories, the teachers who teach your kids that gender is malleable at the age of 3 and 4, the schools that teach you that white supremacy is evil and that every white kid is responsible. Those ones, they should be the only ones allowed to teach American kids how to become American. And he's taking aim, this retired teacher, at private and charter schools because evidently that's where all the Trumpists come from, right?
Well, what they said was the American public school is where we learn to be Americans. And what you just described, if you go back 50 years, that's some of the most un-American, un-Christian, unpatriotic lingo and what they're doing in the public schools that we've ever had. But yet they say, oh, this is American now. Boy, has their view changed.
Well, and this also shows you what we've warned you about for the 10, 12 years of the Common Core era. The public schools had decided that mom and dads should not raise their own kids, that will do it. Moms and dads aren't fit to teach their kids morality and to teach their kids honor and virtue. Because when the moms and dads do that at home, inevitably they're going to do it in a Christian context. We want a virtuous America that is not Christian. We want Christianity. We want traditional marriage. We want the traditional family on the dunghill of history. And so the schools decided that we are going to separate from what we're doing from what the families do. We're going to work against what goes on in the family home. We're going to work against American values and exceptionalism. We're going to use the public schools to reprogram kids away, not just from what mom and dad believes, but what the traditional idea of an American is. We're going to reprogram those kids to be good little Marxists.
So did you say a virtuous school without Christianity? How is that?
Doesn't make any sense. Virtue, the word they would use is not virtue, it would be wokeness, right? What used to be virtue, and you know this, Dave, as a really great author on Christianity, virtue is a wonderful Christian word because virtue means hard work, sacrifice, and effort. Nobody's born virtuous. Virtue is something that has to become part of your life. It has to be inspired by grace. It has to be something that you're willing to sacrifice for. People become virtuous by following Christ. To be woke is just a matter of adopting platitudes. To be woke simply means checking the right boxes in elections. It means simply hating the right people, excluding the right people in the name of progress and progressivism. They literally have taken the word virtue and transformed it into wokeness in the public schools.
So there's a quote in here. She commended her state for lurching toward more charter schools, and that's the word she used.
She condemned them.
Lurching. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Condemned for lurching. She said, with West Virginia continuing its lurch toward more charter schools and broader vouchers, prepare for a further weakening of public schools and common curricula. Get ready for cuts in teacher positions, salaries, and benefits. That would be a bad thing?
Yeah, I don't understand how that's a bad thing, especially what we just saw in Baltimore yesterday, right? Where failing one of the worst public school systems in the country, over 1,000 members of that district are getting paid more than $100K, and the highest paid teacher in that Baltimore system is $156,000 a year. Clearly, money and achievement have nothing to do with each other.
They don't. Haven't we been fighting this for years? Remember Scott Walker tried to do something about this in 2010 in Wisconsin? And, anyone that does try to speak up about any kind of power grab when it comes to the NEA or the teachers' unions, it seems like you're condemned, and the media kind of totes the progressive line with that.
Listen to this schmaltzy, incredibly contrived logically skeptical opening that this woman gives. This Susan Johnson, the retired teacher who's attacking public and private, and charter schools. She says the following: if aliens flew to Earth on any given Friday night in October, they would see a strange ceremony taking place in thousands of communities, large and small. The ceremonial crowning of the high school homecoming king and queen at halftime of a football game is more than an American tradition. It's a rite of passage. Wait, I thought the king and queen were too gendered. I thought the king or queen, the high school king and queen, were reifying traditional gender roles. I thought the transgender people were going apoplectic about that. You're telling me that the reason we all have to go to American public schools is so that 2 kids out of hundreds can be segregated as the king and queen? I thought you anti-capitalists didn't like monarchy either. I thought you woke punks despised autocratic rule. What are you talking about? Maybe, Miss Johnson, before you write these labored introductions, you need to go back to school yourself. She says it's a rite of passage, just like prom and graduation. From American childhood to adulthood, it's a common experience that bonds us as a culture. I don't feel I never went to one of my proms, period. I don't feel bonded in the least. I couldn't tell you who the prom king and the queen were. You're telling me that's why private charter schools are bad? In short, she says, the American public school is where we learn to be Americans. In the United States today, the homecoming king and queen can be black, brown, white, Hispanic. What are you talking about? This is insanity. It is not based on religious doctrine, right? That's what, at the last sentence, you get her final money shot. We can become Americans in the public schools without having anything to do with nasty old Christianity.
Well, isn't that what they've been doing for 50 plus years?
Of course.
Yeah. So they're against charter schools and private schools. So they're not really pro-choice then. They're only pro-choice when it comes to abortion.
There is no choice, right?
Yeah.
But I want you to riff on this for me. All of this Americanism, like proms, she says, it's not based on a religious doctrine. American high school ceremonies have their roots in Greek culture, not Judeo-Christian culture.
American high school ceremonies have their roots in Greek culture. I'm trying to understand what she's saying.
It doesn't make any sense.
No.
And haven't the social justice warriors just branded the Greeks white supremacists? What did the Greeks give us? They gave us democracy. They gave us geometry. They gave us the scientific method, all of which we've been told is racist and bigoted. I mean, she's writing against her own stupid worldview. In public schools, she says, the public decides the curriculum. I'm going to cozy up to my microphone here. The public decides the curriculum. Mom, raise your hand if you've been consulted about your public school curriculum. Mom, when you try to protest that they're hijacking the curriculum to teach your kids transgenderism to 5-year-olds and anti-Americanism to 6-year-olds, telling your little white kids in elementary school that they're racist, raise your hand, Mom, if you were consulted about this. She goes from being completely off her nut with regards to her description of how things are supposed to work to this little gem, that the American public school curriculum was decided publicly. When was the vote? Did I miss the vote? Do you remember the referendum? I don't remember the referendum. Do you remember when we all got together as a nation and voted to warp our kids' minds with Black Lives Matter theology or the 1619 curriculum? You remember being consulted about that?
No, I actually don't.
I don't remember it either. I mean, this is a flat-out Marxist lie. This is what Marxists do. They completely redefine terms. They lie, they cheat, they undermine, they move goalposts. I'm floored by this. I got to carry on briefly. In public schools, the public decides the curriculum. The public votes to elect school boards who decide the facts our children will be taught. What's factual about critical race theory? What's the fact behind this, madam? School boards, and as far as I know, every school board I've ever been around is simply devoted to the state institution, right? They elect people to the school boards. Whatever the state superintendent tells them to do, 9 times out of 10, that's what they do. This is not democracy. All right, and so we come to I think this is an interesting story. On the grand scheme of things, is this a nationwide story? It is kind of. With all the horrible things going on, why pick this story? Bear with Dave and me, and we're going to explain to you why in a second here. Just 1 out of 6 Indiana education majors go on to teach. So that's pretty shocking, right? That you got, for every 6 kids who sign up for a degree in education, only one ends up in a classroom. And now this is a horrible thing if you're a teachers union where we already have a teacher shortage. And why wouldn't we? Teachers aren't allowed to teach. Teachers are simply parrots. They're simply ventriloquist dummies through whose mouths pass the great truths of anti-American socialist left-wing racial theory. Why would anybody want to teach in those circumstances? But look at this. Only 1 in 6 students who pursued bachelor's degree in education at state colleges and universities ends up in the classroom. And I'm going to tell you why. As a professor of 30 years, and I've said this many times in the Dr. Duke Show, the most worthless, intellectually empty, completely unnecessary major on any college campus by far is education. Education programs are a joke. You hear somebody's got a PhD in education, everybody rolls their eyes. Even theater majors roll their eyes because they realize what a waste of time that is. So why is it, Dave, that kids keep taking education but not teaching? Here. Because no matter how bad you are at school, no matter how many other majors you fail, no matter how completely unprepared for higher education you are, you can always get through an education degree with A's and B's. You show up and have a pulse. Literally show up and have a pulse. You sit there with a beating heart and don't make a fuss when they tell you you're a racist, they will hand you a diploma. That's it.
Well, you just lowered the bar there.
It's not a bar, it's a buried pipeline. That's how low they've sent it.
It says out of the roughly 11,000 students who pursued bachelor's degrees in education, just 16% eventually received licenses and found jobs. This is in Indiana now, Indiana public schools. So do you think it's similar around the country, or what do you think?
I don't think it's as bad as that probably, but it's bad. It's pretty bad. And I think the reason it's bad is I teach them. With all due respect, I teach them. I have the one course that I teach. If you want to be a high school English teacher in the state of Wisconsin, you have to have this course. And I'm generally the only one who teaches it. So I see these education majors. And the course is Shakespeare, by the way, because the state of Wisconsin does require some Shakespeare in the public schools.
Isn't he racist yet?
I'm stunned that it hasn't been gotten rid of yet. It'll happen. But I see these education majors. And look, when I get a good education major, it's 1 out of 100. They're as good as any student I have. The rest of them are a complete waste of time. They are backward. They have been indoctrinated. They are low performing. They are incapable of multitasking. They've had multicultural drilled into their head, multiculturalism. They literally take the same course in left-wing politics 6 and 7 times. They're paying for the same course over and over and over again. It's all this critical race theory. It's the worst joke of a major ever invented. And if there was one thing I would do to fix the crisis in American public schools, the first thing I would do wouldn't even be get rid of the Department of Education. That would be number 1A. 1B. Number 1A would be to find a way of preparing and teaching teachers how to do their jobs that had nothing to do with public universities. Send them to a teacher program where you have real people who understand math, science, and English and writing, teaching them not theory, not left-wing agitation, not critical race theory, but simply teaching how teachers can to make them more literate and better students. That's all you need.
More literate and better students. I think there's a sentence here that's buried in this article, and it may kind of get you triggered. Because of what they're choosing people based on race or other things rather than their merit or just same when you hire someone for a job, right? But this says schools are particularly struggling to hire more teachers of color. Well, they got to fulfill their diversity quota and to fill positions in high demand areas such as special education and math. Interesting little observation in the article.
No, it is. And what drives me nuts about the article, it never links the two problems. It never links the two problems.
That's right.
This is a sign of the times. This shows, according to the schools, this shows how racist our school system is. Because we're not getting enough teachers. Only 1 in 6 becomes a teacher, and the number of African Americans and Latinos who are even higher, right? The gap is even bigger. And that, of course, is racism. When you offer a degree that is in nothing but bromides about political correctness and anti-Americanism, when your entire curriculum is run by left-wing socialists who aren't interested in seeing black and minority kids succeed, black and minority success would underwrite would eradicate your premise that the schools have to become places of radical racial revolution. You need the black and Hispanic kids to fail so you can continue justifying making white and Asian kids feel bad about themselves and destroying their educational careers. It's a joke. And again, the thing that's so maddening about and you put your finger right on it, Dave. The thing that's so maddening about the schools in articles like this, it never for 1 minute dawns on them that the reason you're getting all those kids, is because they can't possibly fail. If you had anything like rigor in who you allowed to be a teacher, you would have far fewer students. And the ones who you did have wouldn't stay unless you changed your tune.
The other thing I think that is not part of this article, but let's just say you're a Christian family or a conservative family, Hispanic, black, white, it doesn't matter. Do you want your kids going into teaching knowing the direction of the public schools, knowing what they're being forced to teach? Do you want your kids teaching? So that's another issue with kids not wanting to be teachers.
An amusing story here. I remember when Barack Obama was president. Do you remember this? I remember this. And remember the minute he won, or the minute he was inaugurated, became president. Do you remember the free cell phones?
Yes, Obama phones.
You remember how you had people in the streets screaming, "Thank you, Obama. I don't have to pay my phone bill. Thank you, Obama." And they were thanking him for all the things that he said he was going to do. They just assumed that becoming president, he had already done them. Well, this shows you the thick-headedness of progressives, because now that Joe Biden's president and he made all those big grandiose promises about getting rid of student loan debt, we have kids freaking out that I don't have to pay my cell phone bill. I don't have to pay my college loans back now. Went from free cell phones now to college loans. And all it took was Joe Biden to talk about how we're going to get rid of those student loans. You literally have dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of kids hundreds of kids across the country who are saying, like Kyla Warren says, my student loans are gone! Exclamation, exclamation point. I love you, Biden! Exclamation, exclamation point. Heart. Done. That's how this shows you the civics education of American kids. I voted for Biden. Biden won. I don't have to pay back my student loans.
Debt forgiveness.
Debt forgiveness.
All right.
With a wave of his papal wand, he absolves American children of having to pay their student loan debt.
So Democrats are urging the president to cancel $50,000 in debt with the stroke of a pen, but Biden says he would much rather involve Congress in the decision, and getting any kind of consensus on forgiving student loan debt is going to be very difficult. But here's an interesting sentence in here. It says, some student loan debtors have decided to have a debt strike and refuse to pay on their loans until Biden acts.
Well, why can't the rest of us have debt strikes?
That's right.
I mean, why that? Why that in particular? They went to school knowing what they were getting into. Nobody put a gun to their heads and made them sign all these loans. They took the loans out. They went to schools that were way over what they could afford to pay. And yet now the money's coming due, and they still get all kinds of breaks. They don't have to pay until they get a job. They get all sorts of programs that allow them to extenuate their payments. Things that you and I would never get away with. They're getting away with.
Exactly.
And now just because this is how come we have a country in the trouble we do. These Democrat politicians promise these things, and the undereducated majority of this country see that as golden, right? He's going to let us off. We have no moral responsibility to pay that money back. It really is surprising. Some student loan debtors have decided, like you said, the debt strike. They refuse to pay on their loans until Biden acts. Faberé has now joined the Biden Jubilee 100, a group of 100 student loan borrowers who have stopped paying their debt altogether. The Debt Collective, which calls itself, quote, a union for debtors, unquote, has organized this strike, hoping to pressure President Joe Biden to cancel the country's entire outstanding loan balance. He just spent, Biden, $1.9 trillion on completely unnecessary bailouts, right? Almost had none of it has to do with COVID.
COVID relief.
What our families owe as student loan debt is $1.7 trillion. So in other words, that huge waste of money that Biden just spent without a single Republican voting for it, if that money that was owed by student loan debtors was just paid back. It would have covered it. That's how ridiculous this is. So what we're going to do is we're going to pay $1.9 trillion, mostly to bail out blue states who mishandled COVID.
Yep.
And we're going to waive $1.7 trillion of student debt. And if they get their way, it will be done before the next 4 years is over.
Well, it's not their money.
That's why. Well, that's why.
The anticipation that Biden will act soon is driving the effort. It says, this is an interesting point, like the migrants lining up at the border, ready and waiting for Biden's amnesty, the student loan debtors are under the impression their loans will magically disappear once Biden takes action.
Well, who owns the government? Democrats. So do you think these debtors are going to be punished? And for all those kids at the border, they're coming in. May not be right now, but they're coming in. Why? Because Democrats control everything.
Yeah, but try not paying your electric bill or try not paying your mortgage. I'm going to go on a what do they call it?
Debt strike.
Debt strike. That's right.
Yeah.
Now, this is a fair point. You've probably made this point a lot in your Dr. Duke show pasts. It says, others say it would be unfair for those who've already worked to pay off their student debt and never took out loans, and would send the message that it's okay for people to ditch their debts. So that's when a lot of people, I've already heard people comment on that. Hey, nobody paid off my college loans.
Well, but this is the Democrats. Do you think they care if people think that?
No. You're right. Good point.
Do you think they're bothered by the assumption that you don't have to pay your debt? That's what better way to undermine a capitalist system and turn it into something else, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to pay it. The government will pay it for you. That strikes me as socialism. Welcome to Instant Classics, where it is Socialism Sucks week. And how about the stories for today? Just like yesterday's, the day before's. Do you see why socialism sucks? Do you see on every level how socialism drives you crazy? Now you got a bunch of young Democrat kids voted for Biden who have been promised that they don't have to pay back their student loans, and so they're just not paying them back. They're not going to wait for Biden. They're not going to wait for Congress. They're just going to not pay him. Biden said it's okay. But what Biden said as a campaign promise is now law to these kids. Somebody else should have to pay it. The American people should have to pay for my education. Socialism would get you every time. That's why we're dedicating this week to Socialism Sucks week. And here is my quote for this day. Here's my quote for today. This one is from the great C.S. Lewis. It's from The Problem with Pain, The Problem of Pain. And he takes a digression here to talk about socialism. Lewis says, "Those who reject Christianity will not be moved by Christ's statement that poverty is blessed." Remember when Christ said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, they shall inherit the earth." But those who reject Christianity will not be convinced by Christ's statement that poverty is blessed. But here, a rather remarkable fact comes to my aid. Those who would most scornfully repudiate Christianity, the socialists, as the mere opiate of the people, they also have contempt for the rich. That is, for all mankind except the poor. See, maybe socialism and Jesus aren't that far apart. Lewis continues, the left, the socialists, they regard the poor as the only people worth preserving from liquidation and place in them the only hope for the human race. But this is not compatible with a belief that the effects of poverty on those who suffer is wholly evil. If so blessed, according to the left, are the poor, that the poor are our only hope, the poor are the only ones that matter, if that's true, then you can't turn around and call poverty an evil, can you? Maybe Jesus was right about being poor. But this, Lewis continues, is not compatible with a belief that the effects of poverty on those who suffer it are wholly evil. It even implies that suffering and poverty are good. The Marxist thus finds himself in real agreement with the Christian in those two beliefs which Christianity paradoxically demands, that poverty is blessed and yet ought to be removed. All right, just a quick reminder to please download our brand new Freedom Project Media app. All you have to do is search Freedom Project and make sure to allow notifications. And if you're a fan of the show, please consider a one-time tax-deductible donation to support our Patriot Club, and we will send you our signature tumbler. Visit patriotclub.us. That's patriotclub.us Now we want to take a moment to show some love to our Patriot Club. In our best, very, very white voice today, we'd like to give a shout out to Norman from Amarillo, Texas. And that wraps up the show. Don't forget to check out the latest episode of Dave Fiorazzo's show, Christ and Culture, tomorrow night at 5 p.m. Central Standard Time. For Freedom Project, I'm Dr. Duke. He's Dr. Dave. Honorary. Until next time, stay educated, my friends.